I'm Thomas Mills with Politics NC, and today we have another installment of Restless Natives NC. We have Anderson Clayton and we have Travis Fain, and since we were here a few weeks ago, a lot has happened. The most significant thing I think that's happened is that the final race of the year has been decided, and Allison Riggs is the victor in holding her seat on the North Carolina State Supreme Court. Travis, why don't you give us a little bit about what happened? I mean, this went on for 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, Allison Riggs won this election, the Democrat, by 700-something votes. The Republican, Jefferson Griffin, he did not accept that, and he tried to challenge voters, just specific voters in counties that he thought would probably vote for Democrats, and so it would shift it to him. And he won some, he lost some as it worked its way through the court system, and finally a Trump-appointed judge. It was kind of an interesting read, the judge's opinion, because he listed off several things that the Republican campaign wanted, and said, "Yeah, you can't do any of those. None of these are allowed." It was kind of a "what are y'all doing" moment, and they backed down finally after. You know, I sometimes wonder, having written obituaries when I was a journalist, how often people realize they're writing the first sentence of their obituary. And I think that's what Jefferson Griffin did here. And I think a lot of Republicans, the Republican infrastructure, the state party was very much behind him on this. And so now they're the people who were trying to steal an election until a Trump-appointed judge said, "What are you doing? You cannot do this." Whoops.
Yep. Anderson, what does it mean for Democrats?
It means we get to take a sigh of relief that 2024 is finally over, and that we maintained a win for our Supreme Court justice fight. But it's something that we shouldn't have had to go through to begin with. And I think that voters across North Carolina, the damage is already done for them, right? They have a fear about Republicans challenging their votes. And a lot of people who had never been politically active before, a lot of people who had never had to question their voting integrity, right, did so because they were under threat from Republicans that hold power in this state. And so I think that the former governor of the state, Pat McCrory, Republican governor, had said it himself that his own party was trying to throw fear into elections in the future and what it was going to do to the future of our elections. And now looking statewide and also nationally, we're going to see Republicans do this again in 2026. And it's going to look like now you've got the precedent set for a 6-month delay on any election certification. And I think that should be something that really scares a lot of people around this country right now for what 2026 could look like, depending on marginally where we are with seats for the House of Representatives for the Democratic Party. You know, Kamala Harris did not win as many House seats as Hillary Clinton had when Trump won in 2016 nationally. I think there was about 3 seats versus that Kamala won in the House of Representatives that we have the future to take. And so when you're looking at the Democratic Party right now, it does mean that we're going to be in marginal races in 2026 and in 2028, I think, for control of Congress, which is interesting for what Republicans have done in North Carolina right now, too, that we've got to be watching out for.
Yeah, the decision I thought was very sound. As Travis said, he really rejected a lot of what the Republicans said outright and basically said this is not allowed, particularly the idea of changing the rules after the fact. But I don't think it's going to change a lot internally. It disturbed me that you had 4 sitting members of the court who basically said, yeah, we'll go along with this. And, you know, you had a lot of members of the Court of Appeals who said we'll go along with this. We know that 2 of the 3 Republicans on the committee that heard that the appeal supported changing the election after the fact, and they supported it for all 60,000 plus voters. So,
yeah.
You know,
and they're up in 2026 and in 2028. And so are the 3 Republican justices that also voted in Jefferson Griffin's favor on our Supreme Court. And that's what Democrats get to pull back from this, is that we have the ability now to take that court back from them, both of them.
I think politically it could be very damaging. It's up to Democrats to really make that case, particularly in the military community, that these justices wanted to take your vote away while you were serving overseas. That's almost unbelievable that they would have done that, but they did. Now it's up to Democrats to hammer that home over the next few years and make that help military families internalize that attack on them.
Well, and also you look at just how down ballot drop off happens for our Supreme Court races, and this has really elevated court races amongst public opinion. It's also given, and I think that's where I look at it saying, Republicans got to win here with the 6 months to like 6 month delay, but we also got to win when it comes to elevating the public appeal of voting down ballot, and also understanding the impact of our courts when it comes to national or elections and statewide elections in North Carolina. I think.
I worry though about like who ultimately takes the L here, because it won't just be, I would guess, Republicans on the Supreme Court or in the Supreme Court fights, but the Supreme Court period, because ultimately we to the extent people take in news about these things and then later on there'll be commercials about it, they absorb it and then they kind of synthesize it into whatever message sticks with them. And I worry that the message is going to be, oh, the Supreme Court, that's just partisan, that that can't be trusted. And it like that's the problem when you erode institutions that are important. And ultimately, it only matters so much whose fault it was, because people kind of internalize a lesson from it. And I worry that the lesson is just going to be, oh, that's just a partisan place. It can't be trusted.
I mean, I think that's what Republicans have turned it into, and that's what Democrats right now have got to make the case of that. And I've had people email me and they've said, no, like I'm a Republican, but I believe in bipartisanship on our courts. I believe that there should be balance on our courts, representation of both parties on our courts. And I think, to be frank, Republicans have put our courts in a spotlight where they're saying we're even coming after our judiciary to be more partisan at the state level. It's been happening at the federal level for years now, but we're starting to witness it come down at a local level more and more. And I think people are not attracted to that as much as Republicans think they might be, even in their own party.
Right. One argument I hear Republicans often say is, well, Democrats did it first. But you know something? I was around in those fights in the 90s where it was a Democratic-controlled Supreme Court that was basically, these were gerrymandering cases, but they were often ruling against Democrats that were suing to keep districts that they felt like were not done right. I mean, we've been in these gerrymandering fights for literally decades, and it's not always been. It's fairly new where one side takes the side of their party. Democratic-controlled Supreme Court of Appeals ruled against Democratic-drawn districts back in 20, 30 years ago, and it's not happening now. So, I think the ultimate thing is, though, the threat to our democracy that we're seeing, not just at the state level, at the federal level. And I want to use this to transition for a brief minute into what's going on with the State Board of Elections, because Democrats got handed a defeat at roughly the same time they got the victory with Riggs, and the State Court of Appeals, in an unsigned decision, gave the Republicans control of the State Board of Elections by shifting the appointment of the State Board from the governor's office to the treasurer's office. And as far as just good government, it's a terrible decision, because it basically says the legislature can shift control of the State Board of Elections around at will. But on a broader sense, it feels like they're really politicizing the State Board of Elections, and they're going to go after, they're going to use it as a partisan tool, like they're now using the courts.
Yeah, and a Republican would say, well, it's always been a partisan board. I mean, because the way the state constitution has laid it out is whoever is the governor, that's the party that the majority of members come from. It was true under Republicans, the few times we've elected Republican governors in the last 100 years, and it was true under Democrats. And I know Republicans have been very frustrated about some of the decisions the State Board of Elections has made under Democratic control. I think they have a case there, but as is so often the case, we overreach and we go too far. And that feels like what has happened here to me, is just this is a fairly nakedly partisan power grab, and they're just doing it across the board. Every chance the legislature gets, the Republican-controlled legislature gets, it's taking power from Democrats. It's just clear as a day clear as day what they're doing.
Yeah, they took a 100-year-old precedent and threw it out the window and decided that they were going to strip power away from the governor the only way they knew how, even though this has already been proposed, right? Previously, through constitutional amendments, they put a referendum on the ballot at one point in time to change the power of the Board of Elections office from the governor, and it failed in North Carolina. The voters voted against taking away this power from the governor. And I think it's interesting that the legislature used the last time that they had a supermajority in back in December to be able to pass this bill, and now you saw corruption in our courts again that backed it up. The Court of Appeals allowed for this to happen. The state Supreme Court would back it up even more, and you just see Republicans continuously making our courts hyper partisan and hyper polarized, and we've seen that since 2018 when they took our courts from being nonpartisan races to partisan races. Like, they've wanted this for a long time. It's been strategy for them to make people feel like our court systems are not working for the people in the state, at least in my opinion.
You know, the one thing I think about the state board that we're seeing is they appointed very deliberate partisans. And even regardless of whether it was Democrats or Republicans, the people that were appointed to the state board of elections were usually good government people, and that's now changed. You know, it was not Republican boards of elections that brought down basically much of the Democratic establishment in the early part of this century. It was a Democratic controlled board of elections that investigated Meg Scott Phipps, who ended up going to prison. They investigated Jim Black, who had to resign and went to prison. They investigated the Easley administration, and people in the Easley administration went to prison. You know, it was not hyper partisan. And these folks that they've appointed are hyper partisan. They are elected, I think, to try to make sure that Republicans win elections, and that has never really been the role of the state board of elections. Even if, as you would say, Travis, that Republicans had problems with some Democratic decisions, there wasn't a sense that these guys are trying to hand elections to Democrats. And I think the problem that we're seeing with Republicans right now is we've got a state board of election. We've got a state Supreme Court that seems to be looking for ways to help Republicans win. Now we have a state board of elections with members who are nakedly partisan. Francis DeLuca, who's now the chair, was head of the Civitas Foundation, and he was a hardcore Republican partisan. He sued the state board of elections over voter ID stuff. Bob Rucho wrote. He was one of the architects of gerrymandering when he was in the state Senate. These are people who have a long history of pushing anti-democratic legislation and supporting anti-democratic measures. And that's not the role of the state board. They should be trying to figure out how to make elections more fair, not less fair.
Yeah, I want to posit that if you're getting appointed to the state board of elections, I shouldn't have heard of you. I shouldn't know your name. It would be nice to see people who, there's county boards of elections in every county in this state. So that means there are hundreds of people who are serving, have served on county boards of elections. Could elevate someone like that, right? You could elevate, instead of Sam Haynes? Sam Hayes, who is going to be the new executive director of the State Board of Elections, named by the new board. This is former Speaker of the House Tim Moore's in-house attorney at the state legislature for many years. Not to say he won't do a good job. I don't know what kind of job he's going to do. But you could have taken a county election director and elevated them to the state. Someone that kind of already has a reputation of trust and nonpartisanship. These were decisions that could have been made that were not made. We'll see how it works out. But again, there are a lot of jobs in government where I don't think I should know your name. And if I do, it's probably not good.
I agree. I think that the people that they've appointed are only interested in disenfranchising voters. And I mean, folks, that they've appointed people, Eggers, that is not a fan of or school voting sites on college campuses. You have people like Bob Rucho, who does not believe in Sunday voting and has said that. And also people like Frank DeLuca, who has also been against extending voting hours and making it more available to people and more accessible to folks. And I just think that to the point that you made, both of y'all have made, is that this board should be a place that is not partisan, but helps. And I wouldn't even say make them more, because I think that we have had Democratic boards of elections that have ruled in favor of Republican plans that have come out of county boards just because they want to make sure that the process is fair. This is a process board. It was always supposed to be about whether or not every single county board had what they needed. And now it is, to your point, Thomas, going to be about how can we steal elections. And the state board did make a lot of really important decisions that impacted Justice Riggs's fight and this court case that we just saw come through from Republicans trying to steal a Supreme Court election. And there's a tie between, I think, all of these things happening right now that anybody with eyes in North Carolina can see.
I want to circle back to one thing about the judges and about the decision that was made by the federal court. And it's something I've kind of struggled with watching what goes on with the Supreme Court. But I think watching Judge Myers, who made the decision to give basically said Riggs won the election, was a Republican, a Trump appointee. And it made me think maybe lifetime appointments are a good thing, because, and I'm watching some things happen on the Supreme Court. People like Amy Coney Barrett, making decisions that are kind of surprising a lot of folks. And I wonder if they would make those decisions if they thought they were going to have to leave the court and go deal with their Republican counterparts afterwards. I'm not opposed to having age limits. I don't think anybody should really be serving after 80 years old, and I'm not opposed to even saying you shouldn't be able to serve until you're 45. But
hear me out, Thomas. Hear me out.
Okay.
I get everyone wants to give Judge Myers credit. Great. Made a good decision. Made one I didn't expect him to make, quite frankly. He is still part of the reason why we are in this to begin with, though, why it lasted 6 months. And I'm like, why did you make this decision now is my question, versus when this decision came before you back in January. Did you want to give them that much time? Did you really think that the type of claims, because he wrote a scathing rebuke of Jefferson Griffin. Truly, at the end of that, he says, anybody that's played a sport in high school, right, should know better than to do what you're doing right now. And I'm like, if you really felt that way, Judge, my buddy, my friend, my pal, January is when you could have ended this shit, quite frankly. And so I'm like, why did it take you? And where? And I'll be honest with you, your speculation brain gets to going, right? You're sitting there and you're going, because they didn't want a decision, a definitive decision that would have come out of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals at the federal level on a case like this, because it would have made it null and void of people bringing it up before state courts after it. I'm like, every single thing they're doing is coordinated on that side. They're talking to each other. And I'm like, yes, praise, a Trump federal judge did this for us. But I'm like, what else did he do in the process? And I think we just need to give some of that context to this, because I think people are giving a lot of credit. Whereas I'm like, January, he heard this same argument and didn't and allowed for Jefferson Griffin to continue going. We had to take him up to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals for us to get a decision that came out that said that state court had to go through state court, but federal court maintained that jurisdiction. And I'm like, someone should be questioning that. Why did that happen? Why was that the change up in brain power all of a sudden? I don't know.
I think maybe there's a process. I mean, I think wasn't he following some process? I mean, Travis, do you know the way the courts work or not?
I expect that is what would be said as far as why it happened. I won't try to get into anybody's head. I love it when judges do things I don't expect. It makes me trust judges. Shout out Richard Dietz, the Republican on the state Supreme Court, who, in his dissent said, what do we, no, you can't be doing this. This is a terrible idea. So that's one of the things that has saddened me, is that we're not seeing it as much from our state Supreme Court. It's a little too predictable.
But this is my thing, Travis, too, right, on that. It's like, he has already denied claims like this previously, right? So in my mind, it's sort of like, who was pressuring you on that side to let this go forward, right? What was the... Because I don't believe he's that type of judge either, to be honest with you. I don't believe he's the type of judge that's like, we should let these type of election denials go through. And it sort of became a thing in my, and this is just Xanderson Clayton talking as a person, I guess, not a state party chair, but I'm just like, anybody watching this right now who's got a legal brain should be wowed, I think, at that, of just how quickly somebody was willing to go back on something that they were willing to help set a precedent for. I don't know. That entire thing has been crazy to me. This entire process has been wild.
Okay, here's my hope about it in a broad, big tent sense is I believe what's going on at the federal level is very scary. And I think that the only thing that can stop it, or one of the only things that can stop it, are courts. And a lot of the judges that are going to hear these cases are Republican appointees. And a lot of them that have been pushing back on the Trump administration, some of them have even been Trump appointees. But you've also got, like I said, Amy Coney Barrett, and Gorsuch is even talking about they're thinking they're going to make decisions that are going to push back because he's following a judicial philosophy. I mean, his background is he's been about federal restraint, about restraint of the federal government, restraint of the executive. Is he going to hold tight to that? If he does, it's because at the end of the day, he's going to be there till he dies. It's not necessarily if he had to leave the bench at some point in his life, he's going to have to go deal with his Republican colleagues again for jobs or whatever. And the fact that he doesn't have to worry about what they say gives him liberty, gives all of them liberty to say things that they might not otherwise say if there were going to be consequences for their action. And it just makes me, I'm somebody who's kind of argued about the whole idea of term limits for judges, federal judges. And right now I'm leaning more towards the idea that a lifetime appointment allows you to become independent. And we've seen that in the Supreme Court in the past. We saw Republican judges who ended up defending the civil rights movement, for instance, and conservative judges that were expected to side with more conservative folks who said, no, this is just wrong. This is not where we are.
It's not the law. Like, judges shouldn't be about, is this conservative, is this is it the law? Is it the Constitution, right? And you can discover that right based on those principles. I get what you're arguing, Thomas, too, but I'm like, at the end of the day, because I don't like the term limits question to me is a little less. There was a Bush appointee on that panel when we went up before the Fourth Circuit, and I'll be honest with you, I think that mattered for the type of precedent that he was used to, the type of courts that he was used to coming up in, because we are seeing hyper partisan courts now in a way that we did not during that era. And also there was also a Biden appointed judge on that bench too. And I'm like, I don't know that I don't disagree with you on that, because I am somebody else that's always been for appointments. But I think it's really interesting the way that it's supposed to be about how you interpret the Constitution, I guess. I don't know.
I just think that a lifetime appointment gives you the ability to focus more on that than potential consequences.
Yeah.
So
I will accept a lifetime appointment to this podcast because I think you guys know I'm very cautious in what I say, and I just I have to monitor myself. So
you got it. You're lifetime appointed. Let's switch gears a little bit because Tom Tillis did something that surprised me. He announced that he was not going to support a guy named Ed Martin to become U.S. Attorney of the District of Columbia. And Martin is a bad actor. He's a guy who's flirted with white supremacists and anti-Semites. But more importantly, he was a guy who defended the J6, the January 6th insurrectionists, down to the bone, and he even fired the prosecutors in that office who prosecuted those defendants. So he was a bad actor, and Tillis told the Trump administration, "I will not support him," which means he would not have gotten a favorable recommendation from the Judiciary Committee, and probably would not have gotten a vote on the floor of the Senate. And they pulled him, and so. I'm a guy who spent the last few years beating up on Tom Tillis for saying one thing and doing another. Finally, the guy did what he said he was going to do. I'm reluctant to give him credit because I don't know his motives, but I feel like, he did do something right after doing a lot of things wrong, and maybe there's some pressure point there to help this guy find his spine. What do you guys think?
It's dangerous to assume you know what's in people's heads, but I feel like, Thomas, at least you and I won't speak for Anderson here, but we've talked about this before, feel like Senator Tillis has things he wants to do because he thinks they're right, but he doesn't always do them because he's afraid of losing his seat. The Republican Party in North Carolina has censured. It wasn't he censured at one point? Yeah. Right. Because he was too, I don't know, liberal, whatever, which is hilarious. But I guess my message for Senator Tillis is whatever you do what you think is right, because these people will never love you. They will never love you. A lot of them will hate you. I mean, I'm already seeing large Republican Twitter accounts, various social media calls for, we have to primary this guy, which is just dumb beyond belief. If you're a Republican, to primary Tom Tillis, just come on. But they'll probably try it, and I mean, yeah, God, please give us Michelle Morrow as a Republican challenger for Senator Tom Tillis. I think that works out great for just everybody involved.
The entertainment.
But so yeah, I mean, again, I'm not trying to assume I know the man's thinking. He does not call me and run these things by me. It will surprise no one to hear that. But do what you think is right, and I would give that advice to every politician out there. I believe in what I call the politics of the open hand. The more you try to squeeze on power, the more likely it is to slip through your fingers.
What do you think, Anderson?
I think 5 people died on January 6th. And I think that people that were there in that Capitol that day, at least from the stories that you have heard that have been reported, but also from folks' firsthand telling of it, right? It was just a very fearful day for everybody there. So I'm glad he gained a spine on this one. I'm sad that it did not happen for Daniel Hegseth, and I'm sad that he did not still continue to do what he said he was going to do in those situations as well. Because what we've seen from this is that if he had, we wouldn't be stuck with Pete Hegseth or Tulsi Gabbard or RFK Jr. right now in the other positions that they're in, because we saw that Trump pulled that nominee when Tillis did what he said he was going to do. So quite frankly, I think we've seen a pretty spineless senator that all of a sudden decided to stand up because he was personally impacted. Most of America was not in that Capitol that day with them. I know he was, and I know that he had fear running through his body. And that is probably why he said, man, I don't want that to happen to me again. I wish he felt that way about everybody else in the state of North Carolina and the United States when he was thinking about the other decisions that he made.
I thought about it, and I wondered if it wasn't a political decision. I hate to say that. I think Tillis is a guy who does know what's right. I think he does what's wrong, because I think at the end of the day, for him, ambition is the key driver in his decisions. To Travis's point, nobody's going to love this guy from the right. He has done everything he could. He's been over backwards trying to suck up to him, and it's failed. So in this particular instance, this gives him the political ability to say, see, I'm one of the few people who was willing to stand up to Donald Trump when he's run down the stretch running for office. So,
but then how do you say it's not political, Thomas?
I'm not saying it's not political. I'm saying it is political. I'm saying his whole motivation was strictly political, not because he necessarily made the right decision. It was a political calculation that is an argument he can make in October of 2026.
I thought you were saying that it wasn't, and I was like, no, I'm pretty positive that this was the most political decision that this man has made.
I think that's what he is. I got to tell you, I got no respect for that guy. I really have no respect for Tom Tillis, partly because I followed his career so long, and as I wrote a piece a while back, Tom Tillis in 2016 would not vote for Tom Tillis in 2026. He is that far away from where he was. This is a guy who got into politics because he was trying to get a bike trail in his community. He ran for.
Don't tell me that, Thomas. That's something that would make me like him.
well, look, the guy was not an unlikable guy in 2012.
Obviously not. He became a United States senator.
What's that?
I said, obviously not. He became our United States senator.
Right. But he's a guy who he chucked all of his values, everything that he talked about, to climb the ladder of success. Mm-hmm. I think he's a guy who power has really distorted. And I think it's a sad state of what politics can do to somebody. And I think it's done it to Tillis. He no longer has a true moral compass. He's directed by the political winds. So,
Well, I think that's sad if that's what Washington does to people, to be real with you.
well, I think it does it to a lot of people. And I think it's why we ought to look at who we elect and try to elect people who come with strong moral backgrounds and not people who are, my saying is elect people who want to do something, not people who want to be something.
That's a good one, Thomas. I'm going to start swinging that one around on the campaign trail. I got to recruit people to run for municipal offices this year out of North Carolina.
Well, go get good people. I mean, I think one of our problems right now is people are scared to run for office because they don't want to get beaten up and dragged through the mud. And we really need people, and really from both sides, who can come at this with some sort of good government intentions. And I really believe, and this is maybe a subject, it's something for a later time, but I think the Democrats need to become a party of reform. Go back to embracing good government instead of trying to focus more on really narrow issues, because we need it as a country and as a state.
Yeah.
All right, well, folks, I really appreciate y'all being here today. We'll get together in a few weeks, and maybe we'll have as much news as we had this time. But again, everybody, thank you for listening. We'll see you when we come back again.